Good morning. I'm not sure where John Schweitzer went, but I wanted to say thank you for the mistake, because that set me right at ease. I don't have to be perfect up here, and anyone who knows me knows I don't like to be up here. So this is like way outside my comfort zone. But I want to thank you guys for being such a supportive church. You guys make it easy to be up here because I don't have to be perfect. I can be real with you. Psalm 139 says, "O Lord, you have examined my heart. You know everything about me. You know when I sit down and when I stand up. You know my thoughts, even when I'm far away. You see me when I travel and when I return home. You know everything I do. You know what I am going to say, even before I say it, Lord. You go before me and you follow me. You place your hand of blessing on my head. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too great for me to understand. You have made all my delicate inner parts of my body. You knit me together in my mother's womb. Thank you for making me so wonderfully complex. Your workmanship is marvelous. How well I know it. You search me. You watch me as I was being formed in utter seclusion. As I was woven together in the darkness of the womb, you saw me before I was born. Every day of my life was recorded in your book. Every moment was laid out before a single day had passed. How precious are your thoughts about me, O God. They cannot be numbered. I can't even count them. They outnumber the grains of the sand, and when I wake up, you are still with me. Many of us recognize the name Roe v. Wade, but how many of us actually know the truth behind this ruling? We celebrate the Sanctity of Human Life month in January to remember the anniversary of the Supreme Court ruling that legalized abortion nationwide on January 22nd, 1973. It has now been 44 years since that ruling, and in that time there have been nearly 59 million documented abortions. And even that number does not encompass the amount of people affected by each abortion. The post-abortive mothers and fathers, grandparents, siblings, etc. There seems to be no hotter topic in the political realm than the topic of abortion. Many Christians have a pro-life viewpoint, but still remain relatively uneducated about the history of this monumental political movement. Any of you who know about CareNet know that we specialize in providing accurate information to all of our clients, even informing them about the risks and procedures of all abortions, medical and surgical. We want to offer you, our supporters, that same level of service. So prepare to be blown away by the historically accurate truth about Roe v. Wade. We will be focusing on the Roe of Roe v. Wade, Jane Roe, whose real name was Norma McCorvey. And as you might imagine, someone of this magnitude is it's hard to get the information for her. So what you're going to hear comes from several different sources from both sides, including a book that was written by Norma. Norma McCorvey was born Norma Lee Nelson. Her mother was a prostitute and a fortune teller. Her father was a television repairman, and her mother an alcoholic. She was part Cajun, part Cherokee Indian, and she was reportedly raised as a Jehovah's Witness. Norma was described as wild by her mother, Mary, who confessed to beating Norma as a child. Norma ran away from home at only 10 years old, had several run-ins with the law, and was a 9th grade dropout, having most of her education from reform schools. By the time she was 15, she had been sexually assaulted by a nun and a male relative. At age 16, she married an itinerant steelworker named Woody McCorvey. And as a pregnant teenager, she returned home claiming that Woody was physically abusive. And she planned to raise her unborn child alone. Soon, Norma's first daughter, Melissa, was born. And at that time, Norma told her mother that her sexual preference was for women, which that was a statement that appalled Mary. Now, there are differing views on the adoption of Melissa, but Mary raised Melissa after Norma signed away the rights through adoption papers. Norma claims that she was drunk and tricked into signing the papers, then kicked out of her mother's home. After the loss of custody of Melissa, Norma turned to a life of alcohol, drugs, and homosexual promiscuity, even working at a gay bar in Dallas, Texas. Despite Norma's voiced sexual orientation, she continued to have relations with men, and by the time she was 19, she found herself pregnant a second time. She gave birth and placed this baby up for adoption also. By the time she was 21, she found herself pregnant yet a third time. And she did not want to carry this baby to term. But at that time in Texas, abortion was not legal yet, and she could not afford to travel to one of the 6 states in the U.S. where it was legal, New York being one of them. Surprise, surprise. Her case pricked the ears of a couple of female lawyers looking for a plaintiff that fit Norma's description. The lawyers, whose last names were Coffey and Weddington, had been looking for a way to file suit against the abortion statutes in Texas. Weddington was a post-abortive mother, having gone to Mexico for an abortion while she was in law school. Both women were still in their 20s and not much older than Norma. Coffey and Weddington had a very specific plaintiff that they needed. As Coffey told a reporter later in 1983, it had to be a pregnant woman wanting to get an abortion. She could not have the funds to travel to California or New York for a legal abortion, and she had to be someone who could take the publicity. We could not guarantee her anonymity. The plaintiff's pregnancy could not be too far along either, or the case might be moot before the case was even filed. Norma was 5 months pregnant when she met with her lawyers, and she seemed to be the perfect plaintiff. Norma describes herself as being relatively ignorant of the facts of her own case, and claims that her attorneys simply used her for their own predetermined ends. She stated they were looking for somebody, anybody, to further their own agenda, and I was their most willing dupe. The truth is that she was indeed pregnant, and she sought termination. But later she stated that she was not aware of the implications of abortion or even what the term itself meant. She was told, "It's just a piece of tissue. You just missed your period." Another falsity upon which this case was built was that Norma claimed that her pregnancy was the result of gang rape in order to present a more sympathetic case. She later admitted that this was a lie and that her pregnancy was the result of a casual affair. Few people recognize another case, Doe v. Bolton, which was also passed the very same day as Roe v. Wade. This case removed the restrictions a state might place on when an abortion could be performed. Roe v. Wade legalized abortion through the first 2 trimesters. But Roe v. Wade, on the other hand, removed even those restrictions. According to sources, Sandra Cano was the doe of this case and was also duped and used by her lawyers, as she reportedly never even wanted to get an abortion. The law legalized partial birth abortion. Just as in the case with Norma McCorvey, Cano never personally testified in court in the original case. Norma states that her actual involvement in the case was very minimal. She signed the initial affidavit without even reading it, and she stated, "I was never invited into court. I never testified. I was never present before any court on any level, and I found out about the decision from the Supreme Court from the newspaper, just like the rest of the country." The irony of all this? Norma gave birth to another little girl, who was also placed for adoption. In fact, this little girl was 2 years old by the time the Supreme Court made their ruling. Norma McCorvey, the poster child for legalized abortion in America, never had an abortion, but rather she placed for adoption 3 times. The confusion and irony of Norma's life continued after the ruling. Norma entered into a lesbian relationship that lasted for years. She wrote a pro-choice book and even worked in pro-choice abortion clinics after helping to administer abortions. But in 1995, Norma gave her heart to Christ and crossed over to the pro-life side, leaving behind all her pro-choice work and her sinful lifestyle. After converting to Christianity, she converted to Catholicism, and she would later found the ministry called Roe No More as a pro-life outreach. She would go on to make a commercial urging voters not to vote for Barack Obama, and she exposed the lies of her infamous case. She would also make public appearances for the pro-life community. After her salvation, Norma wrote another book about herself and her life experiences with a pro-life viewpoint. I personally had the opportunity to read this book called Won by Love, and where I learned that Norma's life was literally surrounded by abortion stories. In fact, Norma herself was almost aborted. Her parents already had other children when Mary found out that she was pregnant again. Her and her husband were so poor, the thought of supporting another child was just too much for Mary to bear. She sought an abortion from the only source in their small country town. But the woman there informed Mary that she was too far along in her pregnancy with Norma The woman there informed Mary she was too far along in her pregnancy with Norma for the abortion to be safe. She carried Norma to term and reluctantly raised her. But Norma considered her a burden, the result of an unwanted pregnancy, all her life. Later in Norma's life, while working at an abortion clinic, Operation Rescue, which was a pro-life ministry, moved into the office right next door to the abortion clinic Norma was working at. Emily, which was an Operation Rescue worker's daughter, was a passionate pro-life child of God at only 7 years old. She was not afraid to go over to the abortion clinic office, and she even befriended Norma, becoming a vital part in Norma's journey to salvation. But Emily was also almost aborted. So as you can see, this issue of life and death does not affect just one person. It does not just affect the mother or the father to be. It affects countless numbers of people. Now, I say all of this not to be political, but to show you the reality of this. Norma McCorvey is more or less an orphan. She spent most of her life on both sides of this political issue, this political fence. But her life was nothing short of chaotic, confused, and painful. She was abused, came from a broken home, divorced, the mother of 3 she no longer had custody of. And she was ripped at the seams, right down the middle, by both the pro-life and the pro-choice sides. And frankly, it's disappointing. I wish Norma could have come to CareNet, to a CareNet center where she would have received unconditional care, regardless of her views on abortion, regardless of her lifestyle choices or her past. Most of what I see in Norma's life is a desperate cry for help, trying to fit in, belong, and be loved. An important lesson that we can glean from this story is that though Roe v. Wade was a big deal, it was just a political ruling. We don't work with political rulings, we work with people. The ministry of CareNet is about relationships, not political agendas. It's about people's lives, hearts, and feelings. We want to help unearth and tend to the needs of the women we work with, some of whom have lives that very much resemble Norma McCorvey's. We can't force change on anyone, nor do we want to. We want them to feel loved and cared for. We want them to feel safe so they can open up and let someone else into the messy parts of their lives with hopes that healing can take place. Norma is nearly 70 years old now, and it's so sad that this woman's life was sacrificed for agendas. We work hard to make sure that never happens to any of our clients, and we will continue to do so in 2017. Because CareNet is about relationships, not people. It's about people, not political agendas, and not politics. I'm really excited to see what God is going to do in 2017. As a part of CareNet, we have the opportunity to affect the countless number of people that are affected by abortions by ministering to one woman at a time. I want to thank you so much for giving of yourself to further this ministry through your prayers, financial support, donations, and volunteered time. We cannot do what we do without your generous support. Thank you.
Okay, so they do have the baby bottles for fundraising as a yearly thing, and there are some in the back, and they'll be collected the first Sunday of March, so we got about 6 weeks to fill them.